Channels Television's data analyst Jide Ogunsowo joins me on the news at 10 to discuss the NBS latest figures. I want to thank you so much, Jide, for coming. Jide, you saw those figures. You've perused them. As a matter of fact, the National Bureau of Statistics has shown the cost of goods have continued to increase, rising day by day. The impact of inflation so severe as the numbers we saw. Is that the true reflection of what is happening in the markets?
It depends on how you want to look at it, but I'll share a quick story with you. And it's interesting because about 3 decades ago, I was a much younger student and I had a maths teacher who was very wise. And he then told me that if, Jide, I give you 1,000 naira and you give your friend 500 naira out of that 1,000 naira, how much will you have left? Now, today I can easily answer that question, but as a much younger guy, I couldn't really understand how much would be left if I did give a friend 500 naira out of my 1,000 naira note. But today, even though then that narrative was, today the narrative is different. If you had 1,000 naira notes in May 2010, that's just about 78 months ago, that 1,000 naira today is worth only 500 naira. But that's just one way to look at it. Let's look at it in a different way. If you did put 2 500 naira notes in an envelope in May 2010 and you kept it somewhere, 2 500 naira notes, one here, one here. After 78 months, based on the last figures that we've seen based on inflation, what you will find is in one of those notes, you will indeed find your 500 naira that you kept. But in the second envelope, you will find nothing, even though you kept 500 naira in it. Here's what it means. It simply means that inflation is not a magician. Inflation is the biggest criminal to your income today. So we need to curb inflation based on how it's going. Now, if we look at where inflation was year on year in January, it was 9.6%. Now, we've seen it climb month on month from 9.6% in January to 18.3%. Again, inflation is Nigeria's biggest criminal, stealing incomes from families and stealing the incomes you and I earn on a monthly basis.
Let's analyze the situation a little bit further with the rise in inflation. Is it likely that the minimum wage, 18,000 naira for the workers, do you think it's likely to be revisited?
Again, Gimba, it depends on how we want to look at it. But let me tell you what had happened in 1984. Again, that's about 3 decades and 2 years ago. The president was facing similar tough inflationary pressures. The president, Buhari. And did he increase wages in the public sector? No, he didn't. In fact, what he did was to say that there should be a freeze on the wages in not just the public sector, but in the private sector. But do I think this time around the president is going to call for a freeze in wages in the public and private sector? No, I don't think so. And here's why. This time around we have inflation, though rising, we're in a recession. So we need to spend ourselves out of the recession. And there are primarily pretty much only 4 ways we can do that, Gimba. It's either we lead it by private sector spending or public sector spending or perhaps corporate spending or even we improve our exports. Those are the pretty much 4 places that we need to lead ourselves out of recession. But are we likely going to see a freeze on incomes or wages or any declaration on freeze on wages? I don't think that is likely.
Now, we're inching towards the Yuletide, and a lot of families will be out to spend money to buy clothing, to buy food, especially rice. Rice has indeed dropped a little. We're getting the information from the markets. But has the inflation figures, how much of it have impacted on the economy?
We could look at it from a lot of ways. Food, like you mentioned, education. But let's look at food, for instance. When the prices of food or rice goes up and income remains stagnant, it simply means people go hungry and angry. Now, given when people go hungry and angry, it also means only one thing. It simply means rather than them thinking long term, they think short term. Here's the problem with people thinking short term. It means they become less aspirational. And when they become less aspirational, it's hard for them to listen to any other thing else because people are less aspirational. And it's hard for them to change. It simply means the government's plans and rhetorics of change is harder to implement when people and when inflation goes up. So we see how it all connects. Food prices, people be thinking short term, and clearly we understand they become less aspirational when they think short term, and it becomes harder for them to indeed change. So it simply means as inflation keeps rising, the government's plans to go ahead with that change becomes tougher for them.
But on a more serious note, do you think that the president should increase salaries?
Oh, certainly I do think so, because inflation is really eroding the value of income that households earn. And within the next 48 hours, something dramatic is going to be happening. The Monetary Policy Committee will be having their last meeting for the year. So the question is, will they increase the MPR? Will they increase the CRR? Will they go for more pro-growth related rates? It's going to be interesting, because a lot of what will be decided within the next 48 hours is going to be what will lead us into 2017. So when we say Happy New Year, it will be based on what the MPC will be doing within the next 48 hours.
I'm looking at what we have on the back screen here, and you brought this to us. This is an old newspaper, isn't it?
Oh yes, what
does this tell us?
This is 3 decades ago, and just as we're having inflation at about 18% today, the president was under a lot of pressure based on inflation. So we can clearly see what his decision was then, and that was to freeze pay, not just in the public sector, but because he was the supreme military ruler then, Gimba, he also had declared a freeze in income in the private sector. This time around, he's no longer the supreme military ruler, and I do not think he will be going with policies that will be a declaration on income freeze. I think what we're going to see is the CBN is independent. He will also continue to promote his pro-growth plans. The challenge is, right now, we have rising inflation and we're in recession. So the question is, what kind of inflation will we get when we start growing?
Jide Ogunsowo, Channels Television's data analyst, many thanks indeed for talking to us on the news at 10.